This is episode 76 of our Road to Unicum, and today I review the T-50-2. This is a Tier 6 Russian premium light tank in World of Tanks. It was recently given out as a reward to players who have 4 or more years on their account, so rewarding the veteran players. I'm going to showcase this tank in a couple Tier 8 battles. We're going to look first at a Tier 8 Minsk battle, followed by a Tier 8 Mine, so you can see more into how to play a light tank as bottom tier. Now, if I'm in a brawly medium tank, I would think about going to the one lane. They're good areas where you can brawl, especially if you've got a strong turret. In the case of having a squishy bottom tier light tank like this, I much prefer to go mid. This position allows you to do a few things off the bat. You can scout their tanks as they're heading south along the 7 lane, and then you can see any of their tanks that are deploying in field. Now, you do have to be really careful. This area of this mid ridge, it's very sloped, so if you want to shoot at tanks in front of you, you have to come all the way up and over the ridge and overexpose yourself. And a matter of fact, I'm telling this E25 not to make the mistake that I just made. Now, the reason that you want to come to this mid ridge is threefold. One, you can spot tanks that are in the field to the north of you. Two, you could potentially shoot on their heavies as they make the crossing across the E and F lanes. And three, you can fire on their tanks that are west over by the F1 area. Now, it turns out this T-52, this enemy tank, has already crossed over pretty aggressively, so I'm not going to have any shots on him. But if their tanks manage to push down the one lane, then I will expect to see some targets here in the middle. Now, for right there, you just saw the E25 take damage. You should keep note of which friendly tanks around you are taking damage and how much the alpha is. So based on that E25 getting hit, I can make a reasonable guess that's probably a tank like the Pantera who is firing on the E25. Now, I want to be careful about not getting shot at by those tanks that are in the F1 area, and a lot of times they're going to be focusing on the tanks that are directly to the south of them, which are to my left. And so, for example, what this does here allow me a very long window where I can fire on this T-52 and soften him up, where he is then put down by the E25. Now, the E25, even though he is sitting behind a bush, he is within spotting range of that P-44 Pantera. Whereas I'm a little bit further back. I do get spotted there, obviously, when I take a shot. And in those situations, I can only safely take one shot on those enemy T-52s before, I have to pull back, otherwise risk taking return fire. And you'll see this Pantera here, he fires another shot into the E25, but it's because the E25 is the target that he can see. Now, I'm only visible for as long as I'm lit, and if I stay back below this ridge, I'll eventually drop from being spotted. You have to be super careful here. Your job, if you're here, is not to damage tanks like the Cromwell that are directly across from you. There's too much risk in trying to do so, but whenever possible, trying to keep such players lit so that our tanks on the other areas of the map and our RDs can go ahead and fire on them. Now, none of their heavies are crossing the E lane. There's nothing I can do about it. If they did, then obviously I would get flanking fire, but here I'm not having that opportunity. Now, you do have to be careful of tanks, like they have both their Cromwell and the WZ-131, and either one of those could drive underneath this bridge, just like this WZ. Just didn't. I have to be really careful because he can 3-shot me, right? So he's already taken off a big chunk of my help, and because my hit points are down, I'm going to go ahead and back up behind the ridge. Thankfully, our T-150 finished off, or rather our T-29 finished off the Cromwell, right? And so that's kind of a discouragement to the the WZ. He can't drive too far underneath the bridge and expose himself without taking some heavy return fire. What I've done is I backed all the way up to these bushes. The prior time that the WZ peeked out of the bushes, it doesn't look like I was spotted, but just to be safe, I'm going to sit back here in this bush line, because if he drives out from underneath the bridge, there are gaps where there is no soft cover for him, so I will likely have the first spot advantage. Now, we're doing pretty good winning the western side of the map, and there's really not much reason for me to stay here. Now, you notice, like, at this area of this middle road, it's fairly flat. Now, obviously, you want to be careful about coming up here because you're heavily exposed, and our T-52 is making a very aggressive push across the field. I wouldn't do that personally, or rather I have done it in the past and gotten punished for it really severely. The nice thing is he does light up their E25, and that's a priority target to me, either that one or the T-71. Two fantastic targets because they're both dangerous. The E25 has ninja camo and super high DPM, and then the T-71 is a very effective autoloader. So we have a nice 3-tank lead. This is going to be deceptive. In a moment here, you're going to see the VK-30.02 taking damage, and part of the problem is that he is now flanked by this T-52, which is in the A1 cell. right? And so even though we had a lead, we're going to lose several tanks. Our T-52 had pushed up, is very heavily exposed. And one thing you want to generally do is you don't want to go in the middle of the maps until the edges are cleared. And so, granted, our VK may not have known that their T-52 was still sitting in the corner, but he's got to pay attention to his sixth sense and when he gets spotted to know what to do. Now, as far as this tank mechanically, it has the lowest alpha gun for light tanks of its tier. Each shot only does 85 damage, and the damage per minute is very middle of the pack. And so what that amounts to is fairly weak weaponry, right? Normally you would think if you have a tank with low alpha that it would be balanced out by a very high rate of fire, but in this case, since the damage per minute is very average and the alpha is low, you can't trade very well. Now, what I've recognized here is a situation that I cannot win. Both of their T-52s are pushing down the 1 lane, most likely to come after me. We've got a 2-tank deficit, but I can't force an engagement with those tanks because they will easily DPM me down. And the first one, this lead one, has more hit points than I do. So what I need to do is try to bleed them out and buy time. I do have the E25 behind me, so whatever spotting that I can do will enable him to do some damage, as well as the FE304. And certainly that British RD is going to be super incented to try to help me, because if I die, he's most likely next. So like I was saying, if you think about guns, obviously what you would like if you had the choice, right? If you had a fixed DPM, in general, you would want a higher alpha gun with a lower rate of fire, because that allows you to brawl more effectively. And things like DPM are theoretical numbers, right? You never achieve your max DPM unless you're sitting out in the open and you're able to free fire over and over again. But in reality, a lot of times players will take a shot and they'll pull back within hard cover. I got lucky. That lead T-52, since I was backing up to buy time, my shot tracked him, it spun him around. That's really disorienting if you're trying to land a shot. And that extends my time to live and buys time for the E25 to kill him. And then we finish off the remaining T-52 that comes around. So the main thing to note here is it's not like I have a massive damage total as a tier 6 light tank, but what I managed to do is to help us win field, right? Because once it's done, we can go wherever we want along the map and we have map control. But a lot of our tanks were pushing in the areas between C2 through F5, and you really can only do that if the 1 line is clear, right? Otherwise, those tanks in the 1 line are going to get really easy shots on your rear. Now, obviously, since I am only at 135 hit points, I got to be careful not getting one shot by this T-71DA, and the second I fire here, I get spotted, even though I was sitting behind a bush, because I am relatively close. I'm close enough in the bushes that when I fire, I lose all their camo value, and I'm backing up, I put one shot into them, and the nice thing is, since that T-71 is facing off against me, that allows our E25 to go around the corner, and then to DPM the T-71 down. Now, aside from the weaponry, like I said, it's the weakest gun for its tier 4 light tank, and it also has the lowest silver AP penetration of 118. The other thing to note about this tank is while it is very agile, has really good pickup acceleration, it's also very tall and it has a high center of gravity, and the risk of this is that you can easily flip over. Now, you'll notice since I'm bottom tier here, I make the option to go island, and as I said in the chat before the battle started, my goal was to spot some of these tanks as they're making this crossing, see if we can work in some damage. I was hoping I wouldn't get spotted because I was trying to use this bush in between me and my targets, but I did get spotted and I have to back up. And then you're going to see a lot of really poor light tank gameplay within this battle. These two T-52s are YOLOing in. There's no reason for them to be pushing up so far ahead. And I have seen a lot of players either kind of get intoxicated by the speed of light tanks and so drive around like morons, or because they're bottom tier, they take a very fatalistic attitude. Oh, this is so unfair, I'm not going to be able to do anything. And you're going to watch me carry this battle as the bottom tier tank simply by avoiding fights that I cannot win and trying to create damage opportunities for my team. Now, their T-34-3, that's a pretty hardy, brawly tier 8 medium, and I most certainly do not want to trade shots with them because of my low alpha. And what I want to do is see if I can spot some of their tanks so that we can work in some easy free damage. Now, part of the problem is we don't have hill control, right? They now have a heavy up there along with their WZ. And then our friendly other light tanks here, the T-71DA and this T-52, are YOLOing across this area, which, obviously because the T-34-3 is where he was, they can't do this safely without, eating fire from him, and he's got a very big gun. We do take out their tier 6 medium tank, but that in no way was worth throwing away the T-71DA and most of the hit points on that T-52, and you really have to be careful about conserving your hit points. You'll notice there I took a couple shots at the T-20 because I can see he's not looking at me. The second he starts to rotate his turret around to take a shot at me, then I would pull back. But there are cases where you know that they know that you're there, and maybe there's a chance that maybe he was so fixated on getting the kill shot on that little T-52, the other guy behind the rock, that he was tunnel visioning on him. But either way, sometimes you'll see me take shots on people because they're not looking at me. But what I don't want to do is push south. That is an engagement that I cannot win. And you're going to see our T-43 and T-52 try to make the push down the one lane and just get wrecked. They essentially throw away their tanks. But part of the problem is, even though we have a 5-2 lead, it's deceptive. The tanks that I'm just passing here, the friendly T-69 and Comet, are in a position where they can't fire on anything, they can't spot anything meaningfully. So what I'm going to do is I come up the hill where I can proxy spot their WZ light tank. And same with their T-32. So I can't shoot on them, but I can enable the tank destroyers that are camping over by A4 and A3 to fire them, as well as our arties, right? And so you can see we've now, our two remaining tanks that were on the one lane, right? That T-43 and then the T-52, they've YOLO suicided essentially, right? They picked an engagement they could not win. Now I'm still trying to see if I can proxy spot the WZ-131, so don't mistake this. I'm not going around the hill so I can try to fire on those tank destroyers. All those tank destroyers have much larger alpha than me, and that T-28 HTC has very meaningful armor from the front, right? So again, avoiding a confrontation, a fight that I cannot win. If I can, I'd like to work on some damage on this Tier 7 VK 30.02, but I'm not going to force it. Right, and so I am kind of paying attention to the map. What doesn't feel right to me is the fact that we have no tanks on the one lane, and that's leaving us vulnerable if they decide to push up the 1-2 lane with either their T-20 or the T-34-3. Okay, so the T-34-3 was just spotted. Now he's flexed over to the eastern side of the map, which is a pretty smart thing for him to do. But looking at the map, their T-20 has snuck across the island, and that's really dangerous for us because not only can he spot and get our arties killed, he can also spot our backline tank destroyer. So I need to soften up the sky a little bit. The nice thing is there's a rock directly behind me and the VK-30-02, and I don't have to worry about return fire from the T-20 unless he commits to looking in my direction. So right there I've decided, okay, that's enough damage. I am also potentially exposed to arty. As long as I stay with my butt up against this rock, the risk is not that high, but I need to take a bit of a risk here to see if I can work some more damage on this T-20. I don't want to just sit behind the rocks and be too passive. And then you can see that the score is even now. Remember what I said earlier about that 5-2 lead being deceptive? We didn't have map control. They had tanks on hill, which gives them the advantage because those tanks on hill can both spot our tanks on the northwestern side of the map as well as fire down on tanks that are on the cap from our side. Okay, so I know that the one line is pretty cleared. Again, what we had was a 3-tank lead. It's now down to even odds, but I can come down here and try for some kill shots on this Tier 7 medium tank. Our T-69 finishes them off. There isn't really much I can do about the WZ right now. Right, last time we saw him, we got about 230 hit points taken off of the remaining 660 he had, but that would still take me like over 5 shots to kill him, right? And he could ram me and shoot me. Now our T-69 makes a mistake. First he goes up and the WZ shoots him once. So okay, that I can understand that. But then our T-69 eats a second shot from the WZ without returning fire. And really the T-69 should have pushed W and just taken out the WZ because he's the bully tank. He's the one with the autoloader. I make a mistake. When I first spotted that arty, I thought that I could out DPM the M44 before he'd be able to meaningfully lean over and return fire. Now I got to be careful here. If I'm on the back side of this building behind my rear, I'm potentially hittable by the FV-207 depending where he goes. And obviously I have to be careful about this WZ because he can easily one-shot me, and it's going to take me multiple shots to kill him. Now thankfully our T-69 leans over the hill and spots him. Again, I only have a shot there, one shot safely before the WZ gets his turret around quickly, and I'm not giving him any shot, anything to hit. So thankfully our T-69 comes down the hill and finishes them off. Again, this would have been easier if a minute ago the T-69 had just pressed the W key and dumped his clip into that light tank player. But you know, this happens all the time. I mean, if you look at the way that most of our lights and medium tanks played in this battle, they didn't play it very smartly, right? And I've kind of had to scramble back and forth up and down the west side of the map to kind of cover for some of our mistakes and to try as much as possible to keep their tanks on hill lit, proxy spotted. This already has dropped from my vision. He probably has a camo net. Whatever, doesn't matter. I had hit him in the kneecap right where he has his tracking wheel, and so I could just keep blind firing the same spot. That is the one advantage of having such a high rate of fire gun, even though the DPM is kind of very middling. So it's a fun tank to play. It's pretty balanced, I think, or even I would argue maybe slightly underpowered relative to its peers of its tier, although you can get some trolley balances because the edges and middle of the turret have some strength to them. I hope you enjoyed this video. Take care.